Yeah, I often kind of wonder as well. I actually think about being that you don't really hear very often anymore. In the SARS story was the Muslim girl who was the leader of the Libyan party that Donald Trump always referencing out in the SARS story. You'll hear a lot of her old tweets, but it has a very odd old tweet from like 2011, 2012 around then, where she praises Sharia law when it comes to interest rates on credit card payments, something like that there. And I mean, let's think about what Sharia law said about, oh, I don't know, like feminism, like women in general there. I'm not sure you want to go there here, but ultimately it's this whole idea of what we refer to as this red team alliance between the Marxists, between the communists, and the radical Islamists. Suraj Mamdani is actually a singular one-person encapsulation, frankly, of the red team alliance there. And she begins to grab that what they have in common is a utter living disdain for Western civilization, for the human Christian, for built Western civilization, all the rest. They hate, they want to tear it down to the left. They've been trying to do it as far as Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, probably going further back than that, the French Revolution, the Jacobins there. But today, that's all they stand for, and they're just dripping, seething with bitter envy, resentment.
I'm going to say, every time I see J.D. Vance in a speech like that, certain he's going to be president. There seems to be something that you could put the house on. Not that I'm suggesting people go out there and gamble. Now, Josh, I played a clip just a little bit earlier from CNN showing that the polls are clear. We're talking here about polls run by leftist media like the New York Times, CBS, ABC. And these polls show that the deportation program is popular with voters, and that a clear majority of Americans want to see every single illegal immigrant deported, not just those who've been convicted of additional crimes. It's simply a media activist fastest campaign is not working, Josh. Referring to their detention centres as concentration camps, calling ICE agents Nazis. That's not having an impact on the American public.
This is a crucial point at this particular juncture here, because there's been somewhat of a whisper campaign, a trial balloon happening in some American conservative circles over the past week or so, trying to float this trial balloon of an amnesty program. So Brooke Rollins, who's the President Trump's Agriculture Secretary, has been front and center of this, talking about, maybe we want to help the farmers out, have a greater supply of certain H-2A visas for farm labor there, trying to get more people who are legally permits there. But put simply, the people are not buying it, and above all, Donald Trump's own voters are not buying it. We in MAGA America First and President Trump's voting base, as someone who voted for Donald Trump for president numerous times, like myself, it's simply not what we voted for. We did not vote to legalize a lot of the land there. Frankly, we voted for exactly what Tom Homan, the orders are in Cuba, intending to lead the largest mass deportation operation in the history of the United States. But as the CNN polling indicates there, it's really not just voters for President Trump like me who actually survived this. In fact, if you look at the poll of Americans who support mass deportation of the country's large and growing alien population, now compared to where it was 15 years ago, the percentage of Americans who support that has almost doubled. It was roughly 1/3 during the Barack Obama presidency. It's now 6%. Over on 2/3 of some polls. So that is a massive, massive change. Donald Trump is himself almost secretly responsible, frankly, for that change. It would be a total disaster if the pro-amnesty courts somehow win out in this internal struggle. The good news is that I'm pretty sure that everybody's going to fail and they'll have to do it.
Now, to news broken exclusively early today by Fox News, and they reported that former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey are under criminal investigation for the potential wrongdoing related to the Russian collusion hoax, including allegedly making false statements to Congress. Josh, this is potentially explosive stuff. I would argue this is well overdue. What's your take on this?
My take on this is that Kash Patel was born for this moment. Kash Patel is the FBI director. Kash Patel is one of the first people in the entire American political class who saw the Russia collusion delusion, as I call it, who saw that for what it was, which was this wild information operation foisted on the American people by the Hillary Clinton campaign and Fusion GPS, this very sketchy outfit along with Perkins Coie, the Tony White shoe law firm there. The Russia hoax is one of the greatest hoaxes perpetrated against the American people in American history. And very few people have actually paid any price. That's maybe the utterly most damning detail. Kevin Kleinsmith essentially got a slap on the wrist, and none of the people who were actually responsible actually served any jail time for Russiagate whatsoever. Kash Patel.
They told you Trump was a liar. They told you 60 Minutes was journalism. But behind closed doors, CBS News just paid Donald Trump $16 million to settle a defamation lawsuit without a single apology, without admitting guilt, but with one unmistakable statement. They were caught, and now they're quietly holding to protect the lie they spent years building. This wasn't a mistake. This was a cover-up. And the moment you realize why, it all begins to unravel. They told us it was journalism. They branded it as truth. But what CBS News just did, what Paramount just admitted to $16 million in hush money, wasn't journalism. It was narrative engineering disguised as reporting. A bait slip on the American public, carried out in prime time, then quietly swept under the rug. Consequences did not. Donald Trump's defamation lawsuit was the final on the ring. It was targeted, specific, and damning. At the center of it all was a deceptively edited 60 Minutes interview with Vice President Kamala Harris, where her comments about the Israel-Hamas conflict were softened, diluted, to detach, protect Democrat opposition in the middle of an election. What Harris actually said sent shocker and scream. But what the American people were allowed to see, carefully sculpted to minimize damage. CBS executives dismissed the controversy as nothing more than a routine editorial decision. They insisted it was standard practice, no political intent, no agenda, just journalistic craftsmanship. But that defense fell apart under legal scrutiny. And behind the scenes, something remarkable happened. Paramount, the corporate parent of CBS, cut a $16 million check to Donald Trump, not to drop the case, not to save face, but to make it disappear quietly, quickly, before the FCC could raise questions about Paramount's pending merger with Skydance Media. Let that sink in. They didn't issue an apology, they didn't retract a word, and they certainly didn't admit wrongdoing. But they paid because they were cornered, because Trump caught them in the act, and because the last thing they wanted was discovery, depositions, or transcripts exposing how they shaped the news to serve one party while targeting another. And yet they still want to frame this as some kind of victory. CBS insiders, under the cover of anonymity, admitted the pressure came from above, not from editors or producers, but from Paramount executives desperate to preserve a billion-dollar merger that required federal approval. So what do? Sacrifice journalistic integrity, cut the check, and spin the whole thing as a threat to press freedom. Dan Rather, who has a liberal narrative in life, called it killing. Others said it would have a dangerous impact on journalism, but no one could explain why. If the reporting was so airtight, they paid Trump $16 million. Here's the truth. This wasn't about journalism. It was about control. Control of perception, control of political narratives, control of the electorate's understanding of who's good and who's evil. Trump didn't just win a lawsuit. He exposed a system that thrives on distortion, cloaked in the language of objectivity. Ask yourself, if they're willing to manipulate a vice presidential interview in the middle of a war, what else are they distorting behind the scenes? How many stories have been edited, curated, or outright buried to shield the Biden administration from criticism or to paint conservatives as villains? How often have these networks, CNN, CBS, MSNBC, cut, clipped, and reshuffled facts until they match the ideological script? They claim to serve the public. But this proves they serve a different master, the narrative. And when the truth threatens to crack that narrative, when someone like Donald Trump fights back, they don't double down on facts. They reach for the corporate checkbook. This is the same media ecosystem that called the Hunter Biden laptop Russian disinformation before an election, then quietly admitted it was real after the ballots were counted. The same press that buried the origins of COVID, that dismissed border chaos as a Republican talking point, that spent years covering up the inflation crisis until their own pollsters started panicking. The CBS cover-up isn't a one-off. It's the latest leak in a sinking ship.
How's it
A
all looking out there,
once-respected
boss?
institution now reduced to a political arm of the left, laundering propaganda under the brand of news. And let's not forget, this settlement didn't go into Trump's pocket. Every dollar is being redirected to his future presidential library, a symbolic middle finger to the very media class that tried to destroy him. He turned their lie into legacy, their smear into history. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't just a defamation case. It was a referendum on whether Americans still believe what they're told, whether trust the news still means anything at all. And when a media empire folds for $16 million without a fight, you already have your answer. But the truth is, this wasn't just a one-off failure. It's the symptom of a much deeper disease. The media doesn't report what's happening. It reports what's useful. That's the distinction every American needs to understand. And what CBS just proved in full daylight with this $16 million check. The press isn't a mirror. It's a weapon. And for years, that
Mr.
weapon
Clinton's
has been
name goes
aimed
a
not
long
at
way in this
power,
town.
not at
I heard about
corruption,
this spot. I
not at the
hustled for it,
political elite,
you know?
but at the one man who refused to bow to it. Donald Trump didn't just call them fake news. He exposed them to something worse, narrative engineers with a byline. Look at the track record. From COVID to the 2020 election, from Hunter Biden's laptop to the origins of the Wuhan virus, from Ukraine to Gaza, what we're watching isn't journalism. It's theater. Staged, scripted, and tailored to keep the American public
Fake news was exposed.
distracted, and outraged at the right targets. And when reality doesn't
Fake news was exposed.
quietly, strategically, just like they did with Kamala Harris. Let's be clear, Harris didn't just stumble during that interview. She said something that pulled the curtain back on the left's growing fractures over Israel, national security, and loyalty to America's ally. That was never supposed to reach voters. It didn't fit the sanitized image Democrats spent years
John's been
building
keeping me
of
company on
Kamala
nights.
as an
He'll do
unflappable,
anything for a bit
polished
of
vice
jerky, you know?
president. So CBS cleaned it up. They clipped her remarks. They rewrote the moment. And they wrapped it in production polish, hoping no one would notice. But someone did. Trump's lawsuit wasn't just about defamation. It was about intervention. A direct challenge to the media's assumed right to manipulate political reality without consequence. For once, they weren't the ones asking questions. They were on the stand, under oath, under threat, and instead of defending their edit, they folded, silently, suddenly, and with a $16 million signature. Yet even in defeat,
Stay
they
safe,
held
boss.
on to the lie. CBS didn't apologize, didn't retract, didn't admit fault, because in their world, perception is everything. A newsroom that admits error is a newsroom that bleeds credibility. And credibility is their only currency left. But let's not pretend this was some isolated decision made by a rogue editor. This was systemic. The incentive structure of modern journalism rewards conformity and punishes dissent. Networks aren't independent watchdogs anymore. They're arms of a permanent political machine. And in this machine, every report, every headline, every fact check is a lever designed to produce a preferred political outcome. And the reason they fear Donald Trump has nothing to do with mean tweets or norms. They fear him because he doesn't just call them out. He breaks their monopoly. He exposes the rigging. He puts the camera on them. And now, for the first time, he's made one of the biggest names in broadcast pay for the privilege of distortion. That $16 million was never about restoring the record. It was about protecting something far more fragile than reputation, leverage. Paramount was staring down an FCC-sensitive merger with Skydance, and a drawn-out public trial with depositions and subpoenaed communications would have been radioactive, not just for their merger, but for every executive who has quietly coordinated editorial decisions with political handlers in Washington. Because that's what this really is, an information cartel, a closed-loop system where the facts don't matter, only the optics, where Kamala Harris can fumble on foreign policy and be patched up in post, where the Biden administration can collapse the border and still receive glowing coverage, where the word misinformation is wielded not to protect truth, but to protect the people who profit from hiding it. CBS isn't alone. They're just the first to get caught red-handed and pay for it. NBC, CNN, The Washington Post, they all play from the same rulebook. Platform the narrative, edit out the damage, blame the backlash on right-wing extremism, then circle the wagons and cry, press freedom when the lawsuits come. But here's the catch. They don't fear defamation claims. They fear exposure. They fear what happens when ordinary Americans realize they're being gaslit by people who hate their values, dismiss their voices, and twist the truth to serve an ideology that rewards globalism, open borders, and centralized control. That's why the media class cannot let Trump back into power. It's not about January 6th. It's not about decorum. It's about survival. Because he knows where the levers are. He knows who they talk to off the record. He knows which journalists are really just message couriers for the DNC. And worst of all, he knows how to use the law to push back. This defamation case was their warning shot. And now, behind closed doors, they're terrified he might do it again, on a much bigger scale. They know that if Trump regains power, the gloves come off. Discovery comes next. And once the emails, the call logs, and the internal memos come out, the game ends. Because what Americans want isn't partisan coverage. They want truth. And they're starting to realize who's been hiding it. And if America wants to dismantle this corrupt information cartel, it's going to take more than a payout. It'll take a full-on reckoning. If you want to break the media cartel, you don't negotiate with it, you dismantle it. Because once the press crosses the line between reporting the truth and manufacturing it, they cease to be journalists. They become propagandists, and propaganda must be treated as a political weapon, not a protected institution. This isn't about punishing CBS for one mistake. It's about seizing the opportunity to expose an entire system that has rigged the flow of information in this country for decades. And if Donald Trump returns to power, that mission should begin on day one. First, independent journalism must rise again. The only way to counter centralized media corruption is with decentralization. Independent voices, citizen reporters, small outlets unchained from corporate sponsors and political handlers. An America First administration should direct federal grants, tax incentives, and First Amendment legal protections to support non-corporate media, not to shape their message, but to defend their right to speak without fear, because the regime doesn't just want to silence Trump, it wants to silence you. Second, break up the monopolies. Paramount, CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, these aren't news outlets. They are entertainment conglomerates fused with political operatives.
Yep, because they on any fucking news station that's in the motherfucking movies is news station that you should never trust because they be acting like shit when they supposed to be news. They not supposed to be in some acting shit because now they can't tell you the truth in real news because they actors. They didn't show you that they done been in movies already. Can't fuck with no motherfucking fake news.
That's narrative monopoly, and it needs to be treated like any other monopoly, broken apart. Use antitrust law, use FCC leverage, use the same tools they've used against tech companies like X and Truth Social, because when one corporation controls both the comedy and the crisis, the punchline becomes a policy. Third, end the illusion of journalistic immunity. If a network gets caught manipulating political content, editing interviews, splicing sound bites, burying scandals, or doctoring footage, it forfeits its access. No more prime seating in White House briefings. No more official recognition. No more taxpayer-funded privileges. Press freedom protects truth, not deception. And with that, we need something else America hasn't had since the 1980s. Real transparency in broadcasting. Every political interview aired by a national outlet should be followed by a mandatory upload of the full, raw, unedited footage available for public scrutiny. No more clever cuts, no more out-of-context summaries. If the press claims to be a watchdog, let America watch the dog. But beyond policy, we need investigation. Congressional subpoena power exists for a reason. If Trump returns, Congress should launch a full inquiry into political media collusion. How did CBS make its editorial decisions? Who pressured them? Who stood to gain from the edit and who signed off on the settlement? Pull the emails, get the testimony, let the cameras roll, because once the rot is exposed, the public can finally see how deep it goes. And when we see disinformation weaponized again and again, not as isolated incidents, but coordinated efforts to manipulate national outcomes, it's time to treat it for what it is. Fraud. Civil fraud, punishable by billion-dollar fines, full disclosure of internal communications, and legal accountability for any executive who sanctions a lie. The media calls itself the fourth estate, a noble institution of democracy, but when it behaves like a cartel, it should be treated as one. That's why we need something permanent, a federal office of media ethics, not a censorship board, not a ministry of truth, but a bipartisan, fully transparent commission with authority to investigate and penalize repeat violators of basic ethical standards. Imagine if Enron had been allowed to write its own accounting rules. That's what the press has become, self-regulating liars. We must return to a principle that was once law, fairness doctrine. Broadcasters who operate over public airwaves have a duty, not to push propaganda, but to offer balanced, factual, and clearly labeled commentary. Free speech is sacred, but it isn't a license to deceive millions through omission, distortion, and narrative packaging. Let the facts speak. And if someone editorializes, let them admit it. And finally, return the press to its rightful role. The job of the press isn't to protect power. It's to question it, to dig into it, to challenge it. But somewhere along the way, the corporate press became the PR wing of the very institutions it once claimed to scrutinize. And now, when that alliance is threatened by Trump, by lawsuits, by exposure, they scream fascism, not because they fear dictatorship, but because they fear losing control. This isn't about partisan media, it's about trust, legitimacy, and the survival of an informed republic. Because when 60 Minutes can edit reality and face no consequence, when CBS can lie and settle quietly while pushing billion-dollar mergers, when the most powerful newsrooms in America become the messaging departments for the political elite, it means truth is no longer a public good. It's a managed asset. And now the truth is piling up because the American
The
people
truth is a
aren't
managed
just fed up.
asset.
They're fighting back. You can feel it. It's
Yeah,
felt
they
for
managing how much you
For
get.
decades, the corporate press
Listen, you already.
They branded themselves as protectors of democracy, arbiters of fact, and defenders of truth. But the American people are no longer hypnotized by the voice behind the teleprompter. They're wide awake and furious. Because when CBS pays Donald Trump $16 million for what they claim was a routine edit, the question isn't whether they lied, it's how long they've been lying without getting caught. New polling data reveals the collapse is already underway. A July 2025 Rasmussen survey shows that just 29% of Americans still trust the mainstream press. Among independents, that number plummets to 18%. Among Gen Z, who grew up watching the hypocrisy in real time, trust in outlets like CBS, NBC, and CNN barely registered. They aren't just tuning out, they're calling it out, mocking it, replacing it. The old regime isn't just unpopular, it's irrelevant. And what's replacing it? Alternative media. Conservative platforms like the Daily Wire, Rumble, and Truth Social are seeing explosive growth. The moment CBS's settlement went public, traffic surged across anti-establishment outlets. Why? Because the people know this wasn't an isolated event. It was confirmation that the system has no integrity and that Donald Trump was right all along. In just the past 18 months, over a dozen defamation lawsuits have been filed against the legacy press. Not just by Trump, but by whistleblowers, activists, business leaders, and even former employees who've seen how the sausage is made. They allege manipulation, coordination, and deliberate misrepresentation of fact. And while the networks deny it, their settlements and retractions keep piling up. But it's what's happening inside the newsrooms that should terrify every boardroom executive clinging to the old script. CBS insiders have begun leaking. Internal staff memos reveal deep fractures between field reporters and their corporate handlers. Senior producers, off the record, describe the network as a political operation wearing a press badge. Junior journalists complain they're no longer writing stories. They're constructing narratives. One whistleblower summed it up in 6 words. We're activists in expensive suits. This isn't speculation. not just the right noticing. Even moderate Democrats are beginning to speak up. Some have openly admitted the media's handling of Trump, and the Harris interview debacle in particular made them question what else has been manipulated. When legacy institutions start hemorrhaging the middle, you know the tipping point has arrived. But the most poetic justice of all is this. Trump's future presidential library, funded in part by the CBS settlement, will now stand as a monument to media accountability. Every brick, every plaque, every exhibit detailing the years of lies and coordinated attacks will serve as a living review to the very networks that tried to erase it. It won't just be a library, it'll be a war memorial, a reminder that when the press declared war on one man, they underestimated the people standing behind him. They tried to erase a moment. Trump turned it into history. And let's not forget what started this whole unraveling. A single interview. Kamala Harris caught exposing the true fracture inside the Democratic Party's stance on Israel. CBS tried to bury it. They tried to soften the edges, clip the damage, and shield the regime. But it didn't work. Because in their desperation to edit the past, they exposed their role in rewriting the present. And that's what this moment is really about. It's not about Kamala Harris. It's not about one episode of 60 Minutes. It's about whether truth still matters in America. Because if the networks can twist the words of the sitting vice president, what else are they twisting? The pandemic, the riots, the border, the ballots. Once the foundation cracks, every lie becomes suspect. Every fact check becomes a red flag. Every anchor becomes an actor. And the American people are done playing along. That's why Trump's message isn't fading. It's gaining strength. Not because the media covers him, but because they tried to erase him. And in doing so, they proved every accusation he ever made about them was grounded in reality. The man they labeled a liar turned out to be the only one who could force them to tell the truth, even if it took $16 million to do it. He's not the villain in their story anymore. He's the reckoning. The man who stood alone, took every smear, every hit, every character assassination, and still made them blink first. Because the minute the press caved to the man they claim is beneath them, the mask comes off. The media built a machine designed to shape your reality. But what they didn't account for, what they never imagined, was that one man would drag them, kicking and screaming, into your reality. And what's perhaps most alarming, yet clarifying, is how quietly it all unraveled. There was no grand courtroom spectacle, no breathless media mea culpa, just a wire transfer, just $16 million handed over in silence. That's how truth dies in the corporate newsroom. Not with a retraction, but with a payoff. They didn't stand by their journalism. They didn't
$6 million for land.
They paid. And in doing so, they confirmed everything they pretend not to be. It wasn't accountability. It was containment. The media class doesn't apologize because they don't see you as their audience. They see you as the obstacle between them and control. And the deeper truth is this. If Trump hadn't sued, the lie would have stood unchallenged forever. That's what makes this moment historic. Because for the first time in decades, the American people saw the curtain pulled back. They saw what happens when the illusion is pierced, when the editor's knife slips, and now they can't unsee it. The networks may still own the cameras, but they no longer own the narrative. Trump broke through their firewall, not with propaganda, but with proof. And once people taste truth, no amount of programming can make them hungry for lies again. Because if the media can twist reality, edit your leaders, and still claim moral superiority, then what you're living in isn't a free country. It's a simulation. And Trump just broke the fourth wall.
He broke the fourth wall. That means that you freak from all the bullshit. To know better is just you thinking. It is what it is. It's just that we all just been taught to be straight up stupid fucking guinea pigs. To the elite assholes and all the shit they make up for our ass to go along with. That going along to get along bullshit is over. Cause why would you go along with some shit that don't make no sense to you? When you already got sense already in you. Born with sense to make sense out of living life. You're not as stupid as they say you are, as they teaching you to be. It's time for you to realize how much they've been lying. All you gotta do is think.